Now, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our guest host. He would introduce his guests, and looking for an interesting discussion. Guest host, our Hajj, Muhammad Abdul.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Allahu Akbar. I want to praise Almighty God, Allah, in the Arabic language. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammad ibn Abdul khatimun nabiyyin sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Kul huwa Allahu ahad. Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Sadaqallahul azim. Assalamu alaikum, Imam Ishak Abdul Hafiz.
Wa alaikum salam, Brother Muhammad.
Alhamdulillah. By the grace and mercy of Allah, inshallah, the topic is Islam and Muslims in the world. And first and foremost, without speculation and observation, what is Islam and who is a Muslim?
Inshallah, I'd like to begin, as you started, in the name of God, the most merciful, the beneficent. The defining Islam, the word itself, is from the root word salam, which means peace or submission. And the worldview of the word Islam is that when God first created everything, he created it submitting to him. So that everything, in fact, is in a state of Islam, a state of submission. The particular definition of Islam, to Muslims in the Muslim world, as the Prophet has said, Islam is to believe, to declare, to accept, to bear witness that there is none worthy of worship other than Allah, the creator and sustainer of life, which we say the shahada, at-shahid on la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, and to bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Then to establish prayer, and to pay the zakat, which is the a fee that is based off of one's savings or something that one does not spend all year. Then 2.5% of that is contributed annually, and that's called zakat. And this is something that's obligatory for one who is in Islam. Then to fast in the month of Ramadan, the person who is physically able to do that, but that is one of the pillars, as the Prophet has said. Islam is built upon 5 pillars: to declare that there is none worthy of worship other than God, without associates or partners; to bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger; to establish the prayer; to pay the zakat; to fast in the month of Ramadan; and to make Hajj, the person that can fulfill that ability, physically to be able to do it as well as financially to be able to do it. So there's a condition on making the Hajj. But these are the things that are part and parcel of being Muslim and Islam. And a Muslim is one who does believe in the oneness of God. Now, the bigger picture that Muslims believe is that all of the prophets and all of the messengers, beginning with Adam, are Muslims. For they all submitted to God. And we are, as the Quran says, Kulukum min Adam wa Adam min turab, that all of you are from Adam and Adam is from clay. And so that the humanity is one humanity. And the religion that God sent for humanity was Islam, not the names in which people call themselves after either the prophets or after the tribes. These are the definitions that people today call different religions, but the actual religion that Islam, is submitting to God. And so it's not Mohammedans, we're not Mohammedans, we're Muslims.
Alhamdulillah. By the grace and mercy of Allah, how did you become a Muslim?
That's a wonderful story. I was a student in college at Tuskegee University back in the late 60s, and I was studying African history, and I wanted to study the people of Africa. And particularly the instructor was not a Muslim, but as he described the religion of Islam and its impact upon Africa, and at that time, he said 70% of Africans were Muslims. And then he broke down what was Islam. And as he broke it down and started explaining, what it is that Muslims believed and what Islam was, I could identify with that, particularly when it made the point that Jesus, from the Islamic perspective, is not God and not the Son of God. He just was a human being, born in a unique situation similar to Adam, that God said be, and he was, but that he was not, the God incarnate. And this was something that resonated with me. as well as, understanding that whether my ancestors particularly were Muslim or not, the attractiveness to Islam was the equality of women, in the faith, that there was no, the women didn't have a role that was subjective under men, or subservient to men, but it was on equal par, that in everything that God has offered for men is offered for women. So I like that balance, the whole concept of everyone being connected, that all of the prophets and messengers, it was not different religions, it was the same religion that came at different periods and different times, and so there were different particulars of the practices, but there was no difference in this. These were the things that really made me attracted to Islam. And so, 45 years ago, I accepted Islam, and from that point on, and the reward that I've received is beyond imagination. To have been able to now travel to Africa, to travel to the Middle East, and again, to know that this is not an Arab religion, but this is a human religion. There are 2.5 billion human beings who are Muslims, which is 1 out of every 4 humans on this earth is a Muslim.
In your studying of Islam, as you begin to inquire in your pursuit of Islam, what impact did you have, did Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X have on you, if any at all?
Elijah Muhammad actually was very minimal, the influence from that perspective. I'm from Gary, Indiana, so I was familiar with people out of Chicago, but for whatever reason, that had never attracted me, from the perspective of just from the black race or how Islam was being presented in the mass part of the society back in those days. I really didn't get into Malcolm until after I took my Shahada. And then, even though I had dabbled with the Panthers, so I quoted a lot of his quotes and followed him from that perspective, but not from a religious perspective until after I became Muslim, and then read his autobiography, and then really, really, really fell in love, with him and his growth, and seeing the impact that the faith had done to him as a young person. That was very motivating for myself. And from that point onwards, he always was absolutely a mentor. Even after his death, he was a mentor in the sense of how he stood up, particularly for the black man, giving us something to stand up for, and giving us a quality and a character to resist oppression in the way in which it was being presented through most of my life. We struggled for how would we be able to challenge the oppression in its many forms, and so studying Malcolm and seeing that model to me was always a better model. And then again, particularly his journey when he made pilgrimage and his growth, his evolving as he became more and more conscious, and then all the way to where he totally submitted, to the true God, of Islam, and not associating anything in that worship. And again, looking for that connectedness with all people who are struggling.
What do you see in regards to the things that are happening in regards to the Muslims in the world and how Muslims are being portrayed? You're hearing about terrorism, you're hearing about suicide bombers, etc. How do you explain to people in regards to the criterion of Islam and the things that are going on, and especially like here's the month of Ramadan, and there's a continuation of these things that are happening around the world in various parts of the world?
The particular, Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, truly is the best guide for Muslims and how to implement this faith and take the awesome words of God from the Quran and to let those words be more than just idealism, but actuality. And so there's principles and there are, conduct that one must follow scripturally when it comes to even being oppressed and how you deal with one's enemy. Much of what we're seeing in the Middle East is, the sad result of when people have been so oppressed, even by their own, by the kings and the different rulers and all of the madness that have gone on, particularly since World War I and World War II when their countries were colonized, and the youth got totally disconnected from any kind of hope. So we're seeing people just acting in a very defensive position, and because they on the surface want to use the religion as the mechanism that they claim that they're trying to establish justice in their land, but we're really seeing that they aren't using the principles of Islam. As they have removed those so-called oppressors, they themselves are now the new oppressors. It is clear to look at what the Quran calls for and how did the Prophet, as he went through different struggles and he went through different battles with different persons, he didn't just kill everybody. He didn't just cut off everybody's hands and all this unmercifulness that we are witnessing in much of these people. This whole concept of suicide bomber, this is something totally against Islam, for one to kill themselves and for one to kill innocent people. For one to do much of these acts that we're seeing has absolutely little to do with Islam. And when you see the complication of the former military persons, I mean, it's my assessment that much of these, what we're witnessing, Saddam Hussein had more than 300,000 soldiers that got disbanded in the Ba'ath Party. And these people are the ones that, from my perspective, because there's no way in the world that some people just based off faith could be able to take military equipment and use it on the level that these people are using it, to be able to grab land the way that they're grabbing land, to be able to set up a system the way that they're setting it up. These people have just way more sophistication than just someone who is religiously motivated, and just men coming from different parts of the world with no background in how to run a society and how to structure a military to be doing this is absolutely not possible. And so I know for a fact that it is, the remnants of the other regime that's using Islam as the cover to say that what they're doing is Islamically and they're trying to establish an Islamic state. But there's absolutely nothing they're establishing but madness, and oppression, like I said, just in another name. What people need to, again, if they want to be able to assess what's going on, look at the Quran oneself, study the life of Muhammad through the Sirah, see how when he conquered Mecca and went back into Mecca, he didn't come back in and kill and murder and even the people that had killed Muslims before, killed his followers. He did not come in with a heavy hand. And he did not come in and say that they had to become Muslims, because the Quran says, La ikraha fi din, faqad tabayyana rushdu min al-ghayy, that there's no compulsion in religion. And the truth is distinguishable from falsehood. So there's no way that no one could ever tell a person that if you don't become a Muslim, I'm going to kill you. But because even if the person said they was going to become a Muslim, it's not acceptable by God. Because the only way a person can become Muslim has to be on their own, without any force, without any coercion, without any pressure. Otherwise, it's not even accepted. So for somebody to do that, and then to harm people and to threaten people, or to use this violence in order to create the fear that they're creating, is totally opposite of what this faith is all about. And this is why it's so important, and what's so beautiful is seeing Muslims here in the United States living this faith in the proper way and trying to be, the true exemplars. Because just because somebody is from the Middle East or from the Arab world, they have no basis to think that that's the only picture of true Islam and how Islam can be lived. And so persons in this part of the world can be able to show through giving, through caring, through working and being active, particularly with all people who are going through difficulties, through all people who are suffering, through all people who are in the jails and the prisons or the people on the streets. The Muslims must be holding hands and be out there with them in an active, participatory way to show that this is what Islam is, and by their not only not being compulsion in religion, God makes Muslims. So it's nothing nobody can say, nobody can influence through being charismatic that's going to attract somebody to actually come into the faith. God opens up somebody's heart, and then they'll come into the faith. Our job is to explain to the people what is the faith, so they can be able to see what Islam is and what it does offer, which it offers hope, and for them to know that God is a merciful God, and He is a forgiving God. He is not a God of malice and chaos and confusion, and one that reeks in vengeance. He needs no vengeance. So he forgives and he forgives and he forgives, but He just does not accept that one worship through associating anything with Him, in His creation.
From the atrocities that took place September 11, 2001 in the United States, America and other governments indicted Muslims and continue to indict Muslims and perpetuate numerous atrocities in regards to incarcerating people just on that date. How do you address what took place September 11, 2001 in America and the continuity of that till 2015?
From my perspective, and they don't like to talk about, the real motivation of what brought that about. But from the beginning of 1979, after the Russians had invaded Afghanistan, and this country and others were assisting with the so-called Mujahideen in Afghanistan. But right around that period of time when Iran was beginning to have its own revolution and taking out the Shah, and religious persons were beginning to take reins politically in their countries, then the Western world, challenged that, and the U.S. started putting more and more troops in the Middle East and in Saudi Arabia in particular. And this is what really created the backdrop for what 9/11 was all about, because they, had the young, Arabs and the Muslims in that part of the world had started saying there should be no troops in the holy sites of Saudi Arabia, and that whole emphasis, was what sparked the impetus that led to 9/11. Was continually saying, we said get out of here, and by not coming out, you can, if you look at the different things that happened leading up to that, with the bombings of the ships in Yemen, the embassies that were being, bombed, but all of the emphasis kept being bring the troops out of the Middle East. But of course, the Western nations had the Saudis afraid of the Iranians, and was at that point afraid of Saddam. So they were saying, our troops need to be there to protect you all. And so this was the whole, and people were knowing that with the whole thing with oil, using money in order to build up these militaries. I mean, this whole militarization of the world through Western mechanisms and military hardware, fosters all of these things that led to this attack that came here. But again, it was to strike at and thinking they could strike the kind of a blow that would make the United States pull out. And of course, it just led to more going in. But as we see, 15 years later, are we safer? Is the world better? I mean, as terrible and as horrific as Saddam Hussein was, we were not seeing this madness that we're seeing today. So the dismantling of many of those places following this, with all of the lives that were lost by American soldiers, all of the trillions of dollars that were lost in all of this conflict. Look at Iraq today. Look at the Middle East today. It's worse than it was. And now the world is worse today for what and how they went in to, so-called try to either get revenge or to correct something. So evidently, the method, the policies, the strategies have been opposite of what you would think thinking people would have been able to do, to say, how can we be able to resolve this kind of a conflict rather than exacerbating or turning it into something that now nobody knows where in the world this whole thing is going.
And you made me reflect on the United States Congress passing the Omnibus Terrorism Bill in 2000, and the first person that they came and arrested was Imam Jamil al-Amin. Could you elaborate on his incarceration from 2000 to now as a political prisoner?
When one knows Imam Jamil al-Amin and knowing his history and his involvement, in the struggle, the charges are so out of line with his character and how he's always, dealt and addressed the struggle in Atlanta as well as in this country. And for them to have these charges, there's been so much on persons who even admitted that they were the ones that actually committed the act of killing the sheriffs in Atlanta, but nothing was ever looked at, in a serious way, because, Imam Jamil al-Amin was still so hated for his activism from his SNCC days and from the late 60s that, and once he became Muslim and he wasn't out, radicalizing or talking, he was community building. And when you can see that component, in his involvement across the board in this country, he was such an impactful organizer and leader. And this is why the leadership of Muslims throughout, the Americas have totally and always supported him 100%, and have always felt that this was absolutely something that was travesty in how he was treated and how he continues to be treated.
Could you speak also, like, in regards to the activism of yourself in the prison system and acceptance of peoples of various races accepting Islam in prison, and the recidivism? What is the situation in regards to that pertaining to Muslims in America?
I've been involved in the prison system for more than 28 years, and witnessing the true difference or the true change that men do make, and women who come into Islam and start incorporating it as an actual practice, actual way of life, then we don't see the recidivism as we do in other ways. We don't see them going back to a lot of the lifestyle. And even if they go back to some of the lifestyle, they don't go back to the level and to the degree that they did. So we aren't seeing those numbers go up. We do want to have more community involvement from the Muslims in particular, in working with the men and women on the inside, particularly as they're trying to make these life-changing transitions coming into the faith of Islam. As you mentioned, at one time, mostly in the prisons, it was considered an African-American religion, because the majority of persons, in particular, were aligned with Islam or they felt more comfortable with Islam. So that was the trend. But now many Spanish-speaking persons in large numbers are becoming Muslim, as well as even European Americans are becoming Muslims. And we're seeing this, again, the unification of Islam and its message and its practicality and how it's practiced is, I think, what is the trend that makes that successful. That's not to put other faiths down, but Islam absolutely, is a faith that particularly speaks to men. It speaks to and many of the African-American men who didn't have a man in their life can come into a religion that really addresses how to be a man, how to be a father, how to be a son, how to be a brother, how to be somebody who is trustworthy. One of the greatest things that the Prophet has said, that he asked the question to his companions, what is better than prayer? What is better than fasting? What is better than charity giving? And he said it is being good to people, having good character. And that's one of the strongest attributes. And it doesn't mean that it minimizes prayer or it minimizes fasting or it minimizes charity, but it's given a point that living good, caring about people, this is a quality that God wants of us as human beings. He mentions in the Quran, he did not make us different nations and different tribes and different languages and different shades and colors so that we could despise each other, but that so that we could be able to appreciate each other. Just as we appreciate when you go in a garden and you see different flowers, or you go into a vegetable field and you see different types of vegetables, or you go out and you see different you see cows and you see sheep and you see goats and you see chickens and you see different colors and you see the beauty in that. Well, we should see the beauty in each other as human beings. And if we can be called to that and act upon that, then we can do our part. Because as we see, not just in the Middle East, but here in right in this city, as well as across this country, we continue to see the violence of man against man. And we must, all people of faith, must continue to bring these messages, and accentuate the truths of these messages, which is for people to be able to live a life, a full life, and not to be placed in a category because they can't read or they can't write, or because they aren't from a blue-blooded family, or because they don't have a degree. We have to be able to make a change and make a difference, and again, using these faiths to, again, go over and beyond so that men won't use these weapons that men use and have created to keep this chaos and confusion.
What about women in Islam, the role of women in Islam?
As I mentioned, the role of women is as partners. The word for marriage is a zoj. God says he created everybody in pairs. And, and we're on equal par. Like I said, the woman is not behind the man. She's not in front of the man. She's beside him, and she's we're helpmates, to be of assistance to each other through this journey, of life, and that's what life is. It's a journey. And so collectively, a woman can reach every height that a man can reach spiritually. She can reach every height, mentally, intellectually. There's absolutely, no distinction other than the physical ways in which we were created. And so the guy said that the difference is a man has a role and a woman has a separate role in the structure of the family and in our capacity to do certain things. But those are not things that makes one inferior or superior to the other. But these are unique, innate structures, that we both have. But collectively and together, we become the best as a team, as we were created to be a team, and not to do this on any individual level.
By the grace and mercy of Allah, in regards to the Quran and the Arabic language, what is it in regards to the study of Islam and the Arabic language that makes it stand out in regards to the previous scriptures revealed to the prophets before Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdul, peace be upon him?
The other scriptures that came over time were lost. There was no promise that those scriptures would be preserved in the language as they were revealed. Muslims, believe, as the Quran says, Muhammad is the Khatam al-Anbiya. He's the seal. He's the last messenger, a prophet that is going to come to earth receiving a revelation from God. And God has promised that the Quran would not be lost. And it is not from the time that Muhammad received it. There's never been a period where the Quran was missing for 1 year, 2 years, never. Exactly what was revealed to him in the Arabic language was rehearsed before he passed away. He knew that his companions, which was in the thousands, had exactly what was revealed to him, and it was placed in exact order in which we follow it today, more than 1,400 years later. And again, this is a promise from God that this would be there. And so for all Muslims, it is, the preservation and the retaining of this as an objective and as a goal to read the scriptures in the language as it was revealed. There is no class in Islam, like in other faith traditions, where you have the priest or you have the ministers in a whole class and in a whole category separate from the common person. In Islam, the Imam is only one who has studied and who has learned, but he has no different rank than any father, any man, any Muslim in the community. There's no clergy in Islam. So every Muslim is required, and has the potential to preserve, and many millions of Muslim children, begin to memorize Quran as young as 6, 7 years old. And this has been a practice from the time of the Prophet to this day. And so this is one of the ways it has been preserved and retained. And this continues to be, again, one of the miracles of the Quran is witnessing how it is preserved and transferred from one community, from one generation to the next generation. And this traverses, in Africa, in Asia, because in Malaysia and Indonesia are the largest Muslim populations. And in both of these lands, in Pakistan, as well as in the Arab world, and all Arabs are not Muslim. Sometimes people get confused and think that all Arabs are Muslims. But no, there are many Arabs who are Christians, who are Jews, who are atheists, agnostics, but the majority of Muslims are, like I said, are non-Arab and things, And now here in the United States, praise be to God, there are many even young African-American Muslims who are Hafiz of the Quran. Hafiz is one who has memorized the entire Quran. We have many American-born Muslims who have studied overseas, and now they are learned and they're scholars. And so this is the legacy, the truth of Islam and how it continues to spread.
Alhamdulillah. By the grace and mercy of Allah. Shukran, thank you for the information. By the grace and mercy of Allah, may Allah bless everyone to benefit from the information that you have disseminated. And may Allah, out of His mercy, inshallah, bless and receive the full reward, inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Shukran jazilan.
Silence, and I hear you. I hear you. A poem could be safer, but the voice is really greater in the mix of time and the digging lobby flavor. A poem could be safer, but the mix is really greater in the mix of time and the digging lobby flavor. A poem could be safer, but the voice is really greater in the mix of time and the digging lobby flavor. A poem could be safer, but the voice is really greater in the mix of time.